Thank you for carving out precious time in busy schedules to be here tonight. We really appreciate it. Suzanne did the introduction, so I won't go into that again. There will be a young man that may be coming through the door. He's a new garden worker and an absolute godsend to the garden right now, having that help. You can follow along with what we're going to talk about on this sheet. It's kind of an outline. And as we considered this talk, we were going to talk about planting a spring garden. But what we realized is the planting really can't happen until you've planned it. And the planning makes planting go a lot smoother, a lot easier. So if you just look at these points, time, do what you can within your time constraints. We all work, we have families, we're busy. If you take on too much, it's sometimes difficult to get out to the garden, to water, to weed, to even see what's growing. So really consider your time before you bite off growing a lot of food. Financial, just the cost of it. My darling husband often says to me, you know, we could buy this a lot cheaper if we just went to the farmer's market. And part of that is true. However, the satisfaction of growing our food is priceless.
And the other side of that coin also is supporting local farmers by going to the farmer's market. You know, there are certain things that we are good at, certain things that we aren't good at. So growing what you find that you're good at makes sense, and you're successful, and you're happy. If you grow things and they keep dying, you have problems, you'll be unhappy, and you won't garden as much, and you'll miss out on a lot of neat stuff. So also supporting the local farmers is a good thing. They're making a living off of it, and it's an education opportunity. You can learn by asking questions, and there aren't many gardeners out there that won't share what they think they know or believe they know with you. So always feel free to ask questions.
And you're able to control what inputs you put into your garden, whether you're going to go organic or if you're going to be conventional.
Another consideration is just the physical. Know your physical limitations. I often don't check in with myself, and the next day I wake up very sore, and it takes a few days to recover. So knowing your physical limitations, what you can do and can't do, is really important. Space. Start small. That often ensures success. If you start really big, it gets out of hand, you get overwhelmed. Your success may not always come with the size of the garden. That space thing. We have the luxury of having 5 acres across from the new hospital. A lot of land to grow, a lot of space. Potential. A lot of people do not have that kind of space. You live in an apartment. You live somewhere where there isn't a lot of land. Think about container gardening. Think about going vertical. Now they have, you can hang tomato plants. Trellises are fantastic. Tower gardens. So there are options if you don't have a lot of space to still get a good amount of food. Climate. I think we're kind of, in a sense, out of my first ideas of planning. Just, know those things. Well, no, climate is part of planning.
Yeah. You
got to know where your sun is, where the shade, where the wind, and how you plan for that. How do you plan to deal with really, really hot days and in full sun, or really cold days and a lot of shade? But knowing where those are in your garden will ensure success. You know which crops to put in that full sun. You know which crops to put in the shade.
Another thing that we've learned by osmosis and being in Willits is that some things that grow really well here don't grow well in Ukiah, or vice versa. Things that grow down 10 miles down the hill in Ridgewood Ranch do very well there, but they don't do well at our garden in town. And so, we've learned some things. So if you have any questions about what grows well in Willits, we can tell you from our own experiences what we've had success and failures with. So we can share that with you guys too.
And speaking of that, on the handouts that are on the table, Those will be on the website, but there is a plant guide that Jenny Watts from Sanhedrin Nursery created, I don't know how many years ago, and it's just specific to this area.
Willits.
Thank you, Helen. It's invaluable.
There's also the one that's Mendocino County specific.
Yeah, one that's kind of Willits specific, and then one that's Mendocino County specific. So those will be on the site. Enjoyment. Gardening is satisfying and fulfilling.
It's healing. Yeah.
Healing. Consider doing a little less to keep it in an enjoyable activity. Again, you do too much, it almost becomes like you get home from work and you go, oh my God, I don't really want to go out to the garden because there's so much to do. So again, keep it enjoyable because it really is. And then one of the last things I just like to point out is you garden for your health. After 20 years of research, the Legacy Health Hospital System in Portland, Oregon released studies on the health benefits of gardening, or what is now termed horticultural therapy. It's a very new degree one can get, especially at some of the colleges in Oregon. But if we go over this short paragraph, Ulrich found that surgical patients with views of nature had shorter post-operative stays, suffered fewer complications, and took up to 20% less pain medication than those with a view of a brick wall. When I went up 2 years ago, I went to a conference at this hospital, and they have 7 different horticultural therapy gardens. They have found not only just with patients, but with employees, the benefits of them being able to take a break, go out in the garden. There's less sick employees, there's less stressed employees. One of the doctors that spoke of this emergency room experience where a fellow was brought in, gunshot wound, really a tough situation, and as he tried to ascertain some information from him, the man became violent. The doctor reacted, he became a little hostile, and it started to escalate. And one of the nurses said, I'm going to call security. And the doctor said, whoa, wait a minute, I'm going to go out in the garden. He came back 10 minutes later. He had found truly a very peaceful place in himself from being out in the garden, and when he came in, the fellow calmed down. He was able to get the information, and he was able to help the fellow. So gardening can be very healing. And this information, I have a link here at the end of that paragraph, is you can go on and read a lot more of the findings that they have discovered with horticultural therapy.
I want to say one thing also about the garden across the street from the new hospital. Our garden is that we designed it in a way for the public to be able to come in, and if you have a loved one in the hospital, oftentimes it's good just to get a break, to get away from the hospital environment, to catch your breath, because it could be a stressful time. And you can walk across into our garden and sit in the gazebo, and you're 100 yards from the hospital. You're right there, or if you need be, but you can get a breath and kind of be in the garden and kind of get tranquil and get a little peace to yourself and come back over, for a break, or also take a patient for a walk, just to get out of the hospital environment, to get some fresh air and come across into our garden, which one of the pathways is ADA compliant. It's a general approach to the gazebo, just to sit for some respite for a few moments to get out of the hospital environment without being, more than a stone's throw away from the hospital. So as part of our design was to make that available to the public and to the patients and staff and visitors. Hello, Quentin. Come on up. You're part of us. Come on the end of here.
In fact, we had that experience with Melissa's mother just recently. She was in the hospital and felt like she just needed to get out, and she showed up at the garden, and they didn't even know that she'd left. No, but she wanted to be probably with her daughter, but also in this healing environment.
Just get out of just for a breath.
So it was really nice to see that a patient could just walk across the street and be in this lovely healing place.
Quentin. So for those of you who don't know, this is Quentin Molds. He's our new addition to the garden. He's a local homegrown boy here, and he's a great addition. We're very glad to have him. He's a great kid.
There are a couple of the handouts, 10 tips for your spring garden. I found them to be very beneficial. So once you've planned your garden, once you've assessed your space, your soil, the sun, the shade,
And the water availability.
and the water availability, you're ready to then plan the garden. How many beds, how many containers, if you can have trellises. You can either start seed or you can purchase seed, farmer's market. We have a plant sale once a year at the garden. That is, again, something that you can decide whether or not you have time for. It's, I think, much easier to purchase your plant starts, but for a garden of our size, we have to go with starting everything from seed just for financial reasons. It's too much to think that we could buy that many plant starts.
And if you're looking for a variety, we have a lovely seed company here in town, Bountiful Gardens. They offer loads of different types of seed, and I mean, we ordered peppers from them,
Yeah.
and they have just a great smattering of different types of vegetables that you won't find at other nurseries that are already growing their own starts. So that's a nice little place to, if you guys haven't had a chance to go and check it out, they're over in what's that, Evergreen?
Evergreen
Is
Shopping
that
Center.
Evergreen? So you'll be able to, choose different varieties, something that you haven't tried before. There's 6 different types of Asian greens that they offer, so it's kind of fun to, try other things that you haven't tried before or you don't find in your local grocery store.
You've planned your garden, you know what your soil, all that's like. One of the things to consider, besides just getting a lot of good food from your garden, is, in our situation, we're planting to protect the soil, which is something that if you're going to do this either season to season or year after year, consider really taking care of your soil. The plants eat the soil, and we eat the plants. So what is going into that soil is going into this body. So you want to really take care of the soil. And we've given you the cover crops that you can grow. And this can be in a small container, it can be in a small bed, or it can be in 100-foot beds like we have at our garden. The fava bean, you're growing for not just the compost, but to fix nitrogen and bloom early. That brings in the beneficials, the bees. If you do cereal rye and other grains, you also are growing that for compost, but that particular cover crop does a lot of root systems. It helps break up your soil. It keeps your soil from compacting.
I'd like to add one thing to that real quickly, is that also if you have the space in your garden to possibly grow one small row of flowers just for beneficial insects and for the pollinators, they make, you can buy seed mixes that are bee mixes, pollinator mixes, that the bees love these flowers and there's a lot of pollen and nectar in them. And also, if you want to see a yield increase in your garden by planting with pollinators, it makes a huge difference. We noticed that in our garden. We brought bees in 2 years ago, and our crop yield was incredibly increased. So please help feed the bees too.
Yeah, another thing with soil health, adding compost and adding, using straw to cover beds so they don't dry out as quickly. These are all, factors that you want to consider, for future gardening. You want a crop rotation. You don't want to plant the same thing year after year.
In the same place.
And so, keeping that in your plan. This year I have root vegetables on this side of my garden. Next year, you probably don't want to put root vegetables. Maybe you'd want to grow peppers or tomatoes, something that's above ground. Different, tubers versus cucurbits, they're gonna be taking different amounts of nutrients from your soil. So you want to make sure that you are adding compost after that harvest. Whether you let your garden go fallow over the winter, at least that's already readily available that following spring.
Feed it.
So feeding the soil.
So you mentioned planting for the pollinators.
Yeah, for the bees.
And again, just taking a look at your cover crops will tell you which, the clover and the vetch, they fix nitrogen, they're beautiful, and they attract pollinators. What we found, and this is probably true of any garden, whatever size, is you need beneficial insects to gobble up the
The pests.
nasty little pests
Yeah.
that seem to find you no matter what. So always shoot for growing something that's going to bring in the beneficial, as well as growing for pest control.
Right. We found, because we are registered organic, that we're not using any pesticides or herbicides in the garden, it's a little tougher to keep it under control because nature wants to take what it wants. And so we've, to draw in the beneficial insects, planting to draw in the beneficials, and knowing with aphids what affects them, what bugs naturally love them, and differentiating. So planting a row of flowers that draw beneficial insects in is huge. Organic gardening, you're going to go organic and not use pesticides.
And going back to that, yeah, we are very limited to what we can use out there. We do use insecticidal soap for aphids. We also, incorporate different oils such as neem. Most of these products are going to be coating the insect and basically suffocating most of them. Everything that we do use in the garden is OMRI listed. It's the Organics Review Material Institute. I can't remember.
Yeah.
But anyway, this, so that it's goes through this whole cycle of making sure that those products are not going to leach into the soil and then eventually come out into your produce.
Right.
And a lot of these products won't hurt your beneficial insects as well. So using we also have another handout that goes into the insecticides.
On the IPM from UC Davis?
Through the Master Gardeners, we incorporate a lot of their philosophies out in our garden. And so it's just, the IMPM is a really good resource. Like if you are having a current problem, say with aphid, you can go on there. There's different forums that you can read from, and you can even email and ask questions, and you will have somebody from UC Davis email you back within a few hours.
Yeah, they're good. Also, if any of you want to advance your education in gardening at all, the Master Gardener program through UC Davis, the extension in Ukiah on Low Gap Road is where the Ag building is. It's a 16-week course. We've all been through it. It's an awesome course. You're not a master gardener when you leave the program, but you have enough information to be dangerous. But also, you have such a network at your fingertips. There's so many people that are master gardeners or masters, and they're professionals throughout the UC system that they're at your avail. And you have any questions, you can learn so much and network with people that are actively in gardening, and they have passions for these things, and they have some experience that we didn't have. So it's a great program to go through, and you meet a lot of neat people that way, local gardening.
Again, plant for pest control. We have some suggestions listed here. Ones that feed the soil, sulfur, potassium, iron, calcium, some that help the disease resistance, and then some that bring in the beneficials. So these are just some light suggestions. We brought a little bit in about the orchard, and because the garden has 50-some plus fruit and orchard,
Fruit trees.
we have a couple of nut. We do have some nut. It's a whole other thing. It's not really what I would consider gardening. But if you are going to keep a little bit of an orchard, go visit Dave at Sanhedrin. He teaches a pruning class. He has extensive knowledge.
He's a great resource.
He's a great resource, loves what he does, and he does also help us take care of the garden or the orchard that we have at the hospital garden. The last page is just links that there is an abundance of material online. I think you could probably read about this for days and weeks and months and years and still not exhaust the material that exists online. I do feel that experience is the best teacher, so you can all come to our garden to get your experience. Just as
volunteers are welcome.
Yeah, volunteers are very welcome. But again, you go through some of these links online, there's a tremendous amount of information. And then two good books, of course, we have our local John Jevons here. He has How to Grow More Vegetables. It's a great book, easy to follow, read, and he really does capture all the aspects of having a successful garden. So, planning, best to happen in fall and winter. Mm-hmm. Now is a little late because right now, at least at our garden, we are running to catch up with the end of the rain and get the beds prepared. We have thousands right now of plant starts in our greenhouse, outside our greenhouse, and we are working like mad to get it into the ground. But that's the thing. You don't know when it's going to stop raining. You don't know when you're going to have warmth.
Especially in Willits, because we don't know when the last
have
frost is going
yeah.
to be here too. We're prone to frost in May. So you only can plant so much right now. But the winter planning is really a time to really evaluate and see what you have available and get your tools fixed and get your garden plan down and maybe take it casually, because when spring comes it's kind of like go dog go time and time to really get after it. But winter is a great time to kind of go in and look at it and read a little bit, educate yourself, network a little bit, and prepare for what's coming. I want to speak a little bit about bees. We love them, and Melissa and I both are beekeepers. We have a few colonies of bees at the garden. We're going to have more this year, and at our home we have bees also. But it's not just the honeybees. Most folks are aware of the benefit of honeybees, and we all gather honey and love honey as they're great pollinators. But there's also a little bee in this handout, and those of you who are interested, please take a look at this. Crown Bees put together this package of, it's a self-taught course on the mason bee. And most folks may or may not know what the mason bee is. The mason bee they call them spring bees, and they're small. They're the size of a small fly. But the mason bee is one of the greatest pollinators on the planet. You don't benefit from them directly through the source of honey, but what they do is their bodies are covered with hair from their neck to their toes, and as they belly flop from plant to plant to plant, gathering food for themselves, the pollen is dry on them, and so when they go to the next plant, they spew pollen all over that plant. And they're incredible pollinators. They're most people don't know how good a pollinator they are. They say the average 6 mason bees can do the work of 360 honeybees as far as pollination, because they spread so much pollen. Where the honeybee goes from plant to plant, and because they're all female, they go out and work. The female honeybee will go out with a proboscis, which is her mouth, and she will gather nectar, and the honey and the pollen that she likes, she will take that and wet it and put it on her legs in these little sacs on the side of her legs, and go back to the hive and give it to the other bees who put it in and make honey. The mason bee doesn't make honey, and her only purpose is to procreate the species. So she is gathering pollen for her young. So she will gather pollen, go back, and she will make a pollen ball, which is dry, and she will lay an egg, and then she will go make another pollen ball, lay an egg, another pollen ball, and she does this in these reeds or tubes naturally, and she'll cover the ends with mud. And that's her life cycle, about 3 months. She will gather, as she's gathering food for herself and for her young, she is pollinating tremendously. And the pollinators in the bee world are strictly female. The males are kind of slouches. They don't do much. Their only purpose is to procreate the species, and when they're not needed, they're done away with. It's kind of awful. But all the bees are all female. The worker bees, the nurse bees, they're all female. And the same with the mason bees. The males are, once they've bred, the males die off, and because they don't gather food. And so the females go out and do all the work. And that is the nature of bees. But the mason bee is a wonderful little creature. This is a great, great, great handout. I didn't know a thing about them until Melissa and I went to a Master Gardener class about a month or so ago, and I had never heard of the mason bee. And they're very, very popular. We need them tremendously. They're so easy to care for. They require nothing from us, but provide them a safe home, a small space in the little house. We have one at the garden. You're welcome to come see it anytime. And it has little tubes in it, little reeds, if you will. And she will lay her eggs in there and cover it with mud. Well, the only thing we need to provide for her is a mud source. And she will take that mud and she will pack it and seal the ends of those tubes and seal her babies up. And at the end of 3 months, her life cycle is done and she's gone. And next year we have new mason bees. And they are the tremendous pollinators. There's the mason bees, they call them spring bees. Following the mason bee, which is usually March, April, May, maybe into June at the latest. And then they have what's called a leaf cutter. You may have seen these in your garden. If you see it on your rose bushes, like a half circle chewed out. It's not a bad bug doing that. That's the leaf cutter bee. The leaf cutter bee, she closes off her tubes with particles of leaf material and saliva, and she covers into her tubes with that, as opposed to the mason bee using mud. So there are two really wonderful, and those are more the summer bees. The leafcutter bees are maybe June, July, August, and their life cycle is over. The honeybee, she has a short lifespan also, but they will gather pollen and nectar and make honey probably from the end of March, maybe early April. When the weather gets about 50 degrees, they'll come out of hibernation, and they'll run all the way into the fall to the rains, where they gather into a big cluster, and they will keep the queen in the middle, and they'll gather in their hive. They've got their honey made for the winter to make it through the winter. That's their food source, and they cluster down for the winter and hang low until spring comes again. The problem we've had with honeybees in our area is called colony collapse disorder. And those who haven't heard of it, it's a malady that bees are suffering. Besides the nosema, the varroa mite, there's so many things that are affecting our honeybees nationally, and commercial loss of habitat. But what's happening with the honeybees is a colony collapse disorder, and in Willits in particular this year, Melissa and I both know many folks who have kept bees around here, as we have lost our bees this year. All of our bees were gone. At our home, we had 2 colonies. At the garden, we had 2 colonies. I have friends up on Pine Mountain who lost 7 of 7. A friend in town lost 5 of 7. It's prolific in the Willits area for some reason this year. We've lost the colony collapse. The bees in the wintertime, we check them in the fall. They have plenty of food. The honey stores are full. They go away for the winter. We think they're fine. Well, in February, when the warm spell came, we checked them, and there's not a bee in sight. All the honey's still there. They didn't run out of food. They just left. They ran away and couldn't find their way back home. It's happening across the country right now with honeybees, and they're in jeopardy because of it. And it's called colony collapse disorder. Please research it, read about it. And if any of you are interested in keeping a colony of bees, contact one of us. We can help you with that. But the bees need our help. The honeybees need our help badly. They're in jeopardy right now.
No bees, no food.
Yes, they need food. They need. And the funny thing is, it isn't like they ran out of food and they starved, or there was a disease that was killing them. There wasn't a bee in sight. They're just gone. It's hard to explain. We're trying to understand this right now. And the colony collapse disorder it's tied to loss of habitat, pesticides, herbicides. And diseases through predator mites and things of that nature. But that's not what's happening here. The habitat is still here. They leave their food source. They have a hive full of honey, and they just leave it, and they go. What happens is they leave the hive in the wintertime, which they shouldn't be doing. They should be huddled down for the winter, and they go out, and they get lost, and they can't find their way back, and they die. So it's a big problem with the honeybees right now. And so about 1/3 of our food is pollinated by natural pollinators. Honeybees, mason bees, butterflies, bumblebees, they all pollinate our food. And without the pollinators, we're going to lose a good amount of our food that we eat, a good amount. And so it's in jeopardy right now. And there's a reason to help the bees right now. So after the question and answer period, I'd be happy to answer questions, and we have information here on bees of all sorts. And there's a lot of information to contact folks, but it's a big thing. And those who don't know about bees should really learn what you can about them and encourage others to keep bees. They're very easy to keep. They're wonderful creatures. My spiel. Yeah.
All right. Let's open it up to question and answers. Holly, you had one.
I did. Back when we were talking about pollinators, I heard a great story recently of someone that was planting milkweed at the Parducci garden down there.
Yeah.
And he was planting milkweed for monarchs, and a monarch landed on the plant as he was planting it and started laying its eggs, which I thought were eggs. That's
Greg's.
When you talk about providing a water source for pollinators, how do you make sure that that doesn't become like mosquito water? What kind of water source?
We clean ours.
We clean our water often, but we have a small tray we keep close to where the bees are. The yellow jackets will have some water. They get thirsty too, but they have a purpose as well.
So you just sort of dump it.
Yeah, we also layer the bottom with rocks so they have something to step on so they're not drowning in their dish. And then every other day or so we go ahead and clean it out and hose it down and make sure there's no mosquito larvae in there.
And that's an important point you just made, is that with bees, when you do provide water for bees, they will drown in a puddle of water. Once they get in, they can't get out. So it's important to we do in ours, we have a little tray, a shallow tray, and we put rocks in there and put the water in, and we change it almost daily. But it allows them something to perch on, so they can drink without drowning. Yes,
You didn't find any, they just completely leave?
gone. Wasn't a bee in sight.
I've had that going on for the last 3 years.
Yeah, it's colony collapse disorder.
They leave.
Yeah, they take off in the wintertime when there's no varroa mite, there's no SEMA, there's no foul brood, the maladies that they deal with. There's no lack of food. They have plenty of food in the fall, and we close them. We check them right before the rains come, and they're just gone. There's not a bee in sight.
So, do you mean the hives you have there in the garden area are all empty?
Yes,
That is amazing.
at home as well. Melissa's at her home.
You take such, I see you dress up in your thing, you take such wonderful care. And
We try,
going.
but it's not us. It's nature is dealing us a weird blow right now. Yeah, and the bees are getting dealt a bad blow. So we're trying to. There's a workshop this weekend over in Orland at Oliver SB Company. We're going to go and it's a networking. And we're going to get some more bees, bring fresh bees in, but we're going to ask a lot of questions and try and figure out what's going on with the bees.
You think Davis, Davis?
You got to reach out and find out. Yeah, everybody's concerned about this because it's a huge thing across the country. It's not just here.
Especially in the big valley.
Yeah.
The city crews found two swarms, and I think they were able to catch one of them.
Oh, good. Call us whenever
Did
that
Darren catch
happens.
it?
Well, Darren's related to Lee Bryant, so we called Lee and Lee.
Yes.
and got
Oh, yeah.
Great.
one of them.
So that's where we can find them? No.
But the second one,
He's talking about
you know, I think maybe they were only able to catch one of them.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
If you find a swarm,
Yes.
contact
Yeah.
us. We'll,
Oh, yeah.
we'll go
We'll
take
come
care
get
of
it. Yeah.
We'll gather them up.
And we,
There's always a queen in the swarm. Yeah, whenever you have a swarm of bees, they can be under a park bench, under a chair, in a tree, wherever they'll swarm at. They're looking for a new home. And there'll always be a queen in that swarm. They'll swarm around her and protect her. Well, until they find a new home. When the searchers will find a new home, they'll come back and they'll communicate it, and all of a sudden, whew, they go.
I have no bees in my hive right now, so I'm going to go back there and bravely take it apart.
Take a look. Yeah,
Take a look and see what's
yeah,
Yeah.
in there.
yeah. Colony collapse disorder is a big deal right now.
Okay. Keith?
Is anything known about the wild honeybee, what's happening there?
That's what I'm referring to. The wild honeybee as well. I mean, all bees are wild. Whether they're not domesticated per se, they're gathered from the wild, but they're having the same conditions. I mean, they also are having colony collapse disorder. So they're wondering: is it the amount of pesticides that are being sprayed, herbicides? Is it loss of habitat? There's so many things. There are so many diseases that came into the country since the 80s. These diseases weren't present in America in the 80s. They came over on bees from Europe mostly. Nosema, European foul brood, the varroa mite. Now there's what's called the destructor varroa mite. These mites, they've mutated, and they're getting, so the medicines that we put on them, if we use them at all, to try and keep the mites down, aren't working, and so they've adapted, as all mites will do. So it's gotten to be quite a situation for the bees right now. I don't know that there are that many answers. The UC Davis website, it's a UCANR, which is University of California Natural Agricultural Resources. The website is an incredible source of information, but there are a lot of questions that aren't answered yet. People don't know, what's causing it. It's happening everywhere. It's not just here. The wild bees, native bees. Holly?
so I think I've seen the mason bee,
There's small little black bee.
or I don't know if I think bees, but I've seen, well, I don't know if they're not hives for sale, but like frames.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Little tubes.
Little tubes in
Yeah.
them. It's really easy.
Yes.
There's no maintenance. You do nothing for them.
So if you put a grouping of little tubes. in
Well,
your
well,
garden,
you have to have the
somebody
tubes.
would be happy to find a home in there?
No, what happens is that you buy the mason bees, the cocoons. So what happens is that with mason bees is that in the fall, you harvest the cocoons from those tubes. She's laid them, and her life is past. She's gone. Now the babies with a pollen ball in there, they become a larva, and once they pupate, they will then eat that all winter long. They'll feed on that pollen ball and become a full-grown little mason bee, and they're in the cocoon. And in the late spring, when it's about 50 degrees, they're ready to come out now. And so you can buy those cocoons from Crown Bee, or the tubes that are full of those, and you open it up, and then on a warm day, you set them out near where you want them to lay their new babies at, and they will hatch. Or you can crack them open.
Stick around?
Yeah. They'll stay right
Yeah,
there,
they
and
imprint on that area.
they'll find their tube, and that's where they will raise their babies at. They'll lay their eggs there, and that's all you do for them, and provide a mud source. So she's able to close her when they're full. She can close off those tubes. That's all you do for them, nothing else.
How many different types of native bees do we have here?
I don't know the answer to that. That's a
I think
good
there's over
question.
1,600.
The
Melissa
reason
may
I'm
know.
asking is because down in Berkeley, in one little park, in one block in Berkeley, they counted over 100 different types of native bees.
Well, great.
Other than the European honeybee, these are our native bees.
I believe that
They
there's-
make honey, and they're all aggressive pollinators, and that's a lot.
Yeah.
And they're all native to this continent. A number of them might be just as happy up here with a little climate variation because our climate is not
That's cooler.
as
Yeah.
wonderful and consistent all year as in Berkeley.
Yeah.
We have 4 seasons. But we probably are supporting a very large number of those native bees up here.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be really nice to find out how many of those different kinds we have because they are native here and they're natural and they don't take any care from us.
UC Davis does do a pollinator count every year, so they have people, at the botanical gardens and different areas around the county.
That's a different climate in the Central Valley
Yeah.
as well. I'm wondering if there's been a specific one on this locale because this would be important to us.
Mm-hmm.
And it would reduce our panic over relying on European
Honeybees, yeah. So that's where the mason bee and the leaf cutter would come into.
Yeah.
That would be
Well,
our main
there's-
pollinator.
There's 5 or 6 that I've counted in my garden.
There's over
as well as an
1,600.
overabundance of European honeybees that lives in some tree somewhere. And they, every year we have more and more and more. But I'm mostly interested in the native bees because that's our resource here. And I'd love to know what is specific to our region because those are our bedrock guys.
All righty.
Suzanne?
You mentioned earlier certain things that grow well here and certain things that do not grow well here. Could you say something about that?
Yeah. It's funny because around the valley, certain things that grow well at our home on the east side that don't grow well in the garden, vice versa. It's microclimates, as Katie just said.
There are things that he can grow near me in his little microclimate that I can't possibly grow in my garden.
Citrus is one of those things that we found.
And we're neighbors.
Yeah.
And you're just around the side of a rock and it's different.
Isn't that strange? Yeah.
So again, though, Suzanne, to answer that more directly is if you look at Jenny Watt's guide, she developed that again for this area. So much of what she has on there should be successful.
Okay.
And when we were determining what we were going to grow in the garden, we started out with a lot more variety than we currently have. But after talking to the chef at the hospital and taking into consideration the different pharmaceuticals patients were taking, certain things interact with them that we couldn't grow as much as what we were used to growing. A lot of kale, and we had to cut back on that because kale and coumadin, vitamin K,
Counteracts the effect.
It counteracts. So it's been this learning process, but then we've also discovered that there are certain varieties of potatoes that do better at our garden. We started out with maybe, I don't know, I'd say 10 different varieties. And we're down to about 3 really strong and then another 3 fairly strong and then some that we've just stopped growing altogether. Yukon Golds are my favorite. However, they seem to pick up some kind of disease that starts in the center of it and rots it out. So everything is an experiment. And one of the questions I'm always answering is Melissa will say, well, should we try this? And I said, yeah, for sure. It's an experiment. We don't know until we try it. Kale grows great.
It does grow well.
Lettuces grow great. Tomatoes are pretty good. Great, actually.
Beets do well.
Beets, carrots, cauliflower doesn't do well.
Yeah.
Broccoli, cabbage, great.
And there's also, different, resistant varieties as well that you'd want to, when planting your garden and choosing seed, evaluating what your soil type is like. Certain vegetables do better in a sandier type soil, or a more clay-based soil. So researching those aspects before choosing, a variety for your garden specific, I think is important. Just and asking your neighbor, it's like, well, maybe not your neighbor, but
Neighbors who can grow melons and gourds and beefsteak tomatoes, and I'm on early girls in San Francisco fog,
It's odd, isn't it?
That's about
Yeah.
it, 45, 50
50
days.
days.
Is all I can manage, because we're very different.
One thing we also have learned in the orchard, this has really been kind of key, is that we are going to lean more towards, there's some resistant strains that are resistant, because this area we have a lot of, Willits has a lot of late rains in the spring, and with that comes blight, and with that comes, on the peach trees, the leaf curl, and then the late rains will cause that, and so there are more strains that are available of trees that are more resistant to the peach leaf curl and the blights. So as we replace trees in the garden, as some have died and some will, we replace them, we tend to lean more towards the resistant strains that are available. And that's something that Dave Watts has been instrumental with us. Is as we replace trees, Dave will make recommendations and we'll research it to what is more and more resistant to the problems we've seen. Because Melissa's been taking great notes. As over the years, she's taken notes of what does and doesn't grow well, what diseases we've had, the gummosis, the blights, the peach leaf curl, the scale, the scab on the trees, the things that we're finding. And there are varieties that are available to us that we're finding now that are more resistant to that. And so it's a learning process, so we can tell you only from our own experience what we have started out, ideally thought was going to grow well here, and it didn't. And so we learn, it's a process.
What about chard?
Chard does great here. Diane?
Where I live is pretty shady, and I wonder if there's a general rule about how much sun.
How many hours a day?
Or just sort of
Yeah,
general idea.
generally 6 to 8 hours is ideal. But depending on, the summer, if you wanted to grow lettuces or something like that, you may,
Cool crops,
yeah, cooler crops for those shadier areas might be a better choice. And then something that's doesn't take as long to germinate and come to harvest time, something that's within a 45-day period, something shorter, rather than these long-term plants like tomatoes, like the heirloom varieties. Some of those are over 100 days,
yeah.
and they need that sun to be able to ripen. So yeah, definitely choosing cooler weather crops for shade would probably be my suggestion.
With Willits, we have a shorter grow season here than even Ridgewood Ranch, Redwood Valley down the road. Our grow season is short, and we have a more coastal influence. Then we get the fog, which is nice, but things don't like it as well. So it's a learning curve in Willits as far as what to grow here and what not to grow,
And season to season, it changes
it
too.
does.
Yeah.
Last year we planted tomatoes in April and we were fine. We didn't
Right,
have
the
a late
drought, yeah.
frost. And this year we've had all this late rain, so it's kind of like, well, do you plant or do you still hold out? And so yeah, it's always a learning experience.
Got any experience with some filings?
Oh, yes.
Yes, we have. The last 2 years we've had some phylums in the bed, and basically we've abandoned that bed and let it go fallow. And the key to some phylums that what Carissa, who was working for us, has taught me about that was that you have to kind of chop them up. Because we don't use any pesticides or any chemicals. So I rototilled that bed with a rototiller. And just about once a week, I just kept chopping them up.
And you want to go down about 10 inches.
Mhm.
Isn't that what
As
you were
they come to
doing?
the surface, the new ones are born, you just
Yeah.
keep killing them. And we did that a number of times throughout the summer. And again, the bed laid fallow all winter.
Yeah, and you really want to avoid bringing in woody materials from other sites because they can come in on
They
those
thrive on that.
materials.
Yeah.
Organic matter, avoiding putting compost in those beds.
Right. We
Yeah,
found
so-
that, wasn't that what the cause was? Was that we've determined it was too much compostable matter in those beds that was causing it?
I think we made that assumption. We never really
Okay.
knew.
Okay.
We all were doing a lot of research, and we couldn't find any really solid.
There isn't a whole lot
There
of information.
isn't. And we thought if we're successful, then we're just going to get rich with what we decided was
Yeah.
to chop their little bodies up.
But
But
rototill them that often.
yeah, the other thing is what you plant in it. we have 2 beds that we've identified with synphyllin from last year. And so we've done the rototiller treatment, but it's also, we've planted potato and onion. They're not as susceptible to synphyllin.
Yeah.
I don't know if I pronounced that right.
Synphyllins, yeah.
But, so we've planted those crops in those 2 beds. We'll see how we do this year. It's an experiment. I think we'll actually be pretty successful with what we learned from the rototilling and then more
And letting it lay
resistant.
fallow over the winter.
And using those crops, the alliums, they put off a nasty taste, so they tend not to go after those. And also the potato, because it is a root vegetable and they're quite large, you don't really see a whole lot of the damage. So, choosing different crops to put in those areas would, is more beneficial than just trying to throw tomatoes out there or throw, carrots or whatnot, but could be a little delicious.
Do you remember what we had last year in that bed that was heavy with synphyllins?
We did leeks,
Okay.
yeah, and that's another, an allium family.
Yes.
Do you guys know why wine doesn't grow there?
What was
wine
that,
grapes don't
Holly?
grow?
Why wine grapes?
Too cool.
I think, is
Too
it?
cool and moist.
Because you see areas of Anderson Valley that, have fully coastal influence. I always assume
The Pinots like it out there quite a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the Rieslings and the Pinots, those are cool weather grapes. If you're planting a Zinfandel or any kind of a hardy red grape won't grow here very well. Out of Emmendale, they've had grapes out there for years. They just didn't do all that well out there. They've basically abandoned the vineyard.
The vineyard.
We grow grapes at the garden. We have table grapes along the whole front of the garden, many different varieties. Some do better than others. This is a learning curve as well. Dave supplied us with some ruby reds and quite a few that are just really doing great.
Yeah, we have about 12 different
Varieties there. The red flames, quite a few.
I don't know that
Thompson, Tom Cords.
all of our grapes are seedless. They
They're all
have to
table
be
grapes.
because of patient care. So that was one of the things that we did also focus on with our grapes is they're all seedless varieties.
Yeah, but some grapes will grow well here, Holly, in Willits. It's just a shorter growing season, and we have the cooler weather, and so they're susceptible to mold, and, with the rains.
complaining, we wouldn't be able to afford to live here.
It is
Right,
wine country,
exactly,
yeah,
exactly right.
But there are some grapes that will do well here. I was talking. We were at a what was that? 2 years ago, we met the guy from Anderson Valley, from Huss Vineyards.
He was at the museum doing a lecture.
Yes, and we spoke about growing some grapes. I want to grow some wine grapes in Willits. And he said he would tutor me. He'd take me aside. I'll find something that'll grow well for you in Willits, and I'll show you how to grow them. I didn't follow through, but obviously he believes there are some varieties that will grow here.
Will.
Kitty was saying, Scott,
You want to hear about what grapes grow in Willits? Talk to Richard Jeske and have him do a.
But those are table grapes. Those are not wine grapes. Yeah, but yeah.
Yeah, I have Muscat Zins and Cabs at my place, but I'm a different climate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you can make really nice juice out of any grape.
Sure, sure, you
Whether you
bet.
want to ferment it or not is another matter.
Another matter. Suzanne, did you have a question?
What is your water source?
Right now, we have wells.
3.
And however, again, because we're specific to the hospital and a high-risk population, we have to follow food safety standards. So there's a time frame where we can water with well water, but then we have to stop before, I think it's 6 weeks, 90 days or something, before harvest, and we have to use city water. It's a little challenging because that gets really expensive during those months. Our water bills are $1,400 during those months.
Peak season. Well, we also, in the greenhouse, because we're feeding an at-risk population, in the greenhouse, we strictly have city water only.
Yeah.
When we wash the vegetables, when they're harvested and they're washed and they're rinsed and delivered to the hospital, we're strictly chlorinated. It's because it's chlorinated. It's city water. Out in the gardens, we use the well water. In the orchard, we use the well water. We have 3 wells on site. And so each year, we've got low because of the drought. Last year, we drew a little new one, a shallower well, and got good water as one of our wells dried up. This year, I think we're doing good. All 3 wells right now have water in them, and they're very, very productive right now because of the winter.
you don't have boron or any of those problems?
No.
No, we're very fortunate, Holly. We don't. We have our water tested and our soil tested annually for
Again, food safety regulations,
And
and to be
we got so
registered
lucky with the boron
organic, we
thing.
have to test our soil and our water yearly.
Yeah. So that'll happen next week. We're going to sample both our soils and our water to see what the winter did for us. But yeah, we have city water as well as well water on site. And the city water is a backup for the garden. We prefer to use the well water because it's nature provides it for us and it's not expensive, just the pumping of it. But in the greenhouse, we strictly use colonial water, city water only in the greenhouse.
Yeah.
I know when we think about having a sustainable garden, we're talking about composting.
Right.
Doing as much as we can on site. But in an instance where, like a farm, where you are taking the produce, a certain amount of the produce off-site, it seems like it would probably be necessary to bring in some things from elsewhere.
Meaning as far as soil supplements, soil amendments?
Yeah.
Yeah, we do. And Cold Creek Compost provides us with compost on a regular basis. It's wonderful stuff. But, all of our produce leaves the garden. Everything we grow there leaves there. All the food that we provide to the hospital, and then the excess they don't take goes to the senior center and the food bank. We donate to them.
And we do allow some stuff to flower so we can collect our own seed, so we can continue to have that sustainability in our garden. Stuff that's, fairly easy for us to do. Like, we don't do like carrot seed or anything like that, but,
Right.
Asian greens or
Some of the really
cabbage,
great tomatoes.
collards, kale, the ones that we do plant often. It's,
Tomatillas, tomatoes, we save seeds
Seed
from
from
year
that.
to year, and,
yeah,
And
we're
you
able
find
to
out
use
what
it the
grows well
following
here and what
season.
doesn't, and what doesn't, you just don't bother saving the seed. If it grows well
However,
there, we save the seed.
that little caveat to seed saving is that you can get a squash that'll cross with
Open pollination.
open pollination. So what you might have grown out last year may not be
what's
what you
next
get
year.
this year. We did have a lovely cross between a lemon cucumber and an Armenian cucumber that turned out just to be delightful. But that's something that you have to be aware of if you're saving seed is a little section of, okay, if I'm going to save this, I'm going to grow that over there where it's not going to necessarily cross with something else. But we're doing more of that because, again, sustainability, and when you speak of that, Holly, we are attempting to do as much as we can in a sustainable way. I think that in my innocence of saying, wow, won't it be cool to grow food for a hospital? I didn't recognize there were going to be food safety regulations that really, in
Restrictive.
their own way, are restrictive and cut down on the sustainability. One of the things we talked about in doing more compost, it was, that's a lot of land, that's a lot of compost. And we were going to do goat manure and have animals, and can't do that at this site. We are not allowed.
Yeah.
Food safety regulations do not allow animals on the site. Animal poop that helps you break down that compost, can't use that. So it's a green manure that we're using, which takes longer to break down and then utilize. So sustainability is wonderful, and it's really what we're shooting for. And we do. Each year we're learning things that we can do, but our garden is not sustainable at this point.
I have one other question, just.
Forget it. No, you're cut off, lady. No.
So spring garden, planting a spring garden is the topic.
Yes.
How do you deal with spring anxiety?
How do we deal with it?
This happens to me.
We hired Quentin. That was the answer.
Yeah, this was how we dealt.
We needed more help.
It's already April and I don't have this start. I mean, how do you personally deal with
You just
worrying that you
You
don't
just
have
do,
enough
just do what you can, and one bite at a time. If the planning is huge, and we had a pretty solid plan going into spring. It's just at the last minute we had we had a lack of help, and due to circumstances, and all of a sudden Quentin came along and saved our bacon. So he and I have
Did you still need volunteers?
Oh, yeah, and I was just going to say that, Holly.
volunteers are wonderful.
The other way we deal with it is the hospital put out a blast to the employees about, we were going to do a planting party this past Saturday and Sunday. You send it out to your friends. They are doing this. Whenever they get emails from you, it isn't just the squash in their cars or at their doorsteps. It's the emails that say, "Can you help us?" But we had 5 farmers from Ridgewood Ranch show up on Sunday.
Wonderful, yeah.
Diane and a couple of women showed up on Saturday. We got a total of, yeah, and Helen's is a volunteer. Eileen in the second
Is a
row
great
there
volunteer.
is amazing. We wouldn't be able to deal with the onslaught of spring and what has to happen if there weren't volunteers. And Keith came. He was one of the
Keith Baker.
Saturday, Diane and Claudia Wenning, and then the group from Ridgewood Ranch. And so that's how we deal with it, Holly, and we depend on it. It's an absolute godsend.
And, you know, to go back to the,
Still need those volunteers?
Absolutely.
always.
Always.
Always, yeah.
we have 25 beds to plant, so we can always use volunteers.
Okay, and when,
Well, Saturdays and Sundays do work really well. What other days that would really work well?
I'm at the garden Wednesday through Saturday, or Sunday, excuse me.
Yeah,
And, you
And
know,
the rest
anytime
is-
I'm there, I love to have volunteers.
Yeah.
you bet.
what hours is show on Saturday and Sunday?
You know, usually like 8 to 4.
Yeah.
We do, Holly, speaking of planting, is we don't plant past a certain hour because it gets a little wilty. The
It's
plants
hot.
really, it's really hard on them. So what we did was about 9 to 11, Diane, Keith, and that was just about getting hot enough around that time. And then as the season does pick up and we do plant, we're in the garden around 6:30
little earlier.
in the morning and until. But again, we have to cut off at a certain time. It gets warm.
Yeah. Well, you know, Holly, to answer your question more directly as far as how do you deal with the anxiety and the stress of spring, you just try, you know, if you realize that if it's take a smaller bite. Just plant a
Yeah.
smaller garden. It's okay. There's next year. You know, and that it's fun. And it's not to where it's a burden.
Yeah.
Because when it becomes a burden, it's no fun. You know, it's you don't. Life has enough to throw at you as it is without adding that to it. So,
Diane?
Do you go by the calendar of good planting days and by the moon? and which days?
we don't have that luxury too often. We just kind of go, dog, go. Is it, Melissa?
I mean, but we do try, you know, our seeding schedule is it is pretty on with the, you know, the planting with the moon cycle.
Moon cycle.
That could kind of help, you know, if there's a certain day that needs to happen, that might help with the anxiety too.
Well, the new moon's coming up, isn't it?
A certain day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tomatoes after Cinco de Mayo, no, but maybe it'll be earlier.
Well, last year, Holly, in fact, we did plant them about a month and a half early, and it caused some concern because we weren't sure whether a frost, but again, we had a drought year. We didn't have the same weather pattern, so I think we planted 48 tomato plants, and we only lost maybe
many.
3 or 4 of them.
But you also have was it the agribon, which is a cloth that you can put over, you know, if there is a chance of frost. We incorporate plastic. I mean, even if we have heavy rains and we seed a bed, we'll go through and we'll hoop the bed and put plastic over the top of it so the seed isn't being splashed out. But, you know, so there's ways of, you know, kind of going a little bit, doing some preventative stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Another stress tip that works for me is, and also for the plants, is I plant in the evening because then they have all night
All night.
to rest
Recuperate.
before the sun comes up in the next day. I don't lose plants. And it's also a nice time of day after work to rest
Sure,
and relax
yeah.
in the garden. Because gardening is a great therapy for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a good meditative practice. And so I would like to suggest that after work, go plant your garden. No stress.
The mosquitoes.
Yeah. So we've just been given the sign. We're a little off our time frame. They like to leave here pretty much on time. So is there another burning question that we can answer before we start wrapping up here?
And we have a lot of flyers on the table, a lot of information. Please take it. There's a lot there. There's a lot of information.
It's also on the website. We'll be on the website. The website's a great resource. You can watch all our previous Avenues to Wellness videos. There's handouts from previous talks. It's really neat to go over that material. Diane's done a couple of talks, which have been power-packed full of information that I've had to watch a couple of times just to glean some of the really important information on not eating sugar. So go to our website. It really is, and it does have a lot of information.